She sat alone on the dusty roadside, her small daughter pressed tightly against her chest, their eyes scanning the horizon as if hoping someone, anyone, would appear. No home, no family, not even a proper name. They were shadows of a life that had been stolen from them, invisible in a world that had already forgotten them. Every stranger's glance felt like a judgment, every passing horse a reminder that time and luck had turned against them. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but worse was the emptiness in her heart, a quiet despair that whispered she might never belong anywhere. Yet just as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with fire, a figure appeared, a lone cowboy, dust swirling around his boots, his gaze steady and unreadable. He carried no words at first, only presence, and something in his eyes promised change, hope, and perhaps the beginning of a life she had thought was lost forever. Her past was a trail of heartbreak and endless struggle, a story written in tears and silent nights. Her husband had vanished without warning, leaving only memories of promises broken and dreams shattered. Her family, once a refuge, had turned their backs, leaving her and her daughter to face the harsh world alone. Every town she entered brought whispers, cold stares, and doors that closed before she could even knock. She carried her daughter through rain, dust, and scorching sun, feeling the weight of each step like chains on her spirit. Yet in the depths of her exhaustion, her daughter's wide, innocent eyes shone like tiny stars in a dark sky, giving her courage to move forward, to keep surviving. The world had forgotten them, but she clung to hope, fragile and trembling, unaware that destiny was quietly riding toward her, ready to turn despair into a chance at life she had never imagined. The sun had vanished behind the hills, leaving a pale glow that barely lit the dusty road as she trudged forward, her daughter's tiny hand clutched in hers. And every creak of the wagon wheels or rustle in the bushes made her heart leap in fear and anticipation, when suddenly a shadow moved into their path and she froze, tightening her grip on the child, her mind racing with thoughts of danger and betrayal. But instead of a threat, a tall, rugged cowboy emerged, his boots stirring up clouds of dust around him, his coat flapping lightly in the evening breeze. And at first she flinched, expecting judgment, dismissal, or even hostility, because the world had taught her to distrust strangers. Yet when he approached, his eyes met hers with an unusual steadiness, a calm that seemed to slice through the tension like a knife. And though his face was weathered and serious, there was something in the softness of his gaze that whispered of understanding and unspoken kindness, a quiet patience that made her shoulders relax slightly, though suspicion still lingered like a stubborn shadow. He didn't speak at first, only nodded gently toward her daughter, who clung to her mother's neck, wide-eyed and trembling. And the girl's innocence seemed to soften the rugged edges of the man before them. He crouched slowly to be closer to their level, his movements careful and deliberate, showing no threat, only presence, a promise that he meant no harm. He offered a small, reassuring smile, and it was as if the heavy air around them lifted slightly, the cold wind carrying away some of the loneliness that had weighed on her heart for so long. Yet the mother's mind raced with caution because hope had betrayed her before, and she could not easily believe that anyone, even someone who looked kind and strong, could truly change her fate. The cowboy extended a hand, not to touch forcibly, but to gesture for connection, a silent offer of help. And in that simple action, there was a weight of unspoken compassion that seemed to reach deep into the cracks of her weary spirit. He asked nothing immediate, only observed and waited with patience that felt almost endless. And in the quiet of the approaching night, with shadows stretching across the dusty ground and the wind whispering through the tall grass, she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in years, a tentative hope, fragile yet undeniable, a possibility that the world had not abandoned her entirely, that maybe, just maybe, someone could see her worth beyond the mistakes and losses, the sleepless nights, and endless wandering. And in the gaze of the cowboy, the mother sensed a future where her daughter could laugh without fear, where warmth could replace the emptiness, where kindness could be more than a fleeting dream. And though she still hesitated, the tension in her chest began to ease, replaced by a cautious curiosity. And as the cowboy waited, unmoving yet inviting, the horizon dimmed to twilight, and she realized that the encounter was more than coincidence. It was the fragile first thread of a life that might finally lead them out of darkness into a place where names, homes, and hearts could be restored. And in that quiet, suspenseful evening, with her daughter leaning against her, the mother understood that destiny had arrived not with fanfare, but with the measured steps of a stranger who might become the anchor she never knew she needed. Even as the cowboy remained a silent presence nearby, the whispers of the townspeople drifted through the streets like cold wind, carrying caution and judgment that made her stomach twist with unease. Every comment she overheard from behind shop windows and fences reminded her of the harsh world she had tried to escape, warning her not to trust strangers, not to hope for more than survival, not to believe that anyone could truly care without expecting something in return. And though she wanted to believe in the cowboy's quiet kindness, her heart wavered under the weight of experience and fear. The memory of abandonment and betrayal pressed against her chest like heavy stones, making it almost impossible to consider that someone might actually offer safety without hidden motives. Yet she could see in his steady eyes and measured actions a sincerity that contrasted sharply with the harshness around her, and her daughter clung to her skirts, sensing tension she could not fully understand but trusting the protective presence of her mother, and every cautious step forward with him felt like walking on fragile glass. Unsure whether the next moment would shatter their fragile hope, the cowboy's patience never faltered despite the cold glares, sharp whispers, and open suspicion he faced. Each day spent near her and her daughter bringing him silent resistance from neighbors and strangers alike who doubted the presence of goodwill in the world. Yet he persisted, offering small gestures of care, a water jug left at their temporary shelter, a hand gently guiding them across a muddy path, a quiet word of reassurance that carried weight far beyond its simplicity. And though she recoiled at first, her heart began to notice the difference between empty promises and consistent presence. Even as fear tightened its grip and doubt whispered relentlessly in her mind, could she allow herself to hope? Could she trust that life might finally extend a hand instead of a fist? And every time she considered rejecting him to shield herself from potential pain, her daughter's wide, trusting eyes reminded her of the fragile light she carried for the child's sake, urging her to consider the possibility that kindness could exist even in the harshest world, that strength could be found not in solitude but in connection. And though the townspeople continued to gossip, casting sideways glances and shaking their heads, the mother felt a subtle shift within, an internal battle between learned caution and instinctive hope, while the cowboy's calm persistence became a silent anchor, steady against the rising storm of suspicion and fear. And with every interaction, every careful step toward understanding, a thread of trust began to weave between them, delicate and tenuous, yet undeniable, hinting at a future where judgment and whispers might no longer dictate their path, where a mother and child could finally feel a measure of security and belonging in a world that had long refused them both. And as the sun dipped lower behind the distant hills and shadows lengthened over the streets, she realized that surviving was no longer enough, that perhaps, just perhaps, she could allow herself to step toward the possibility of a life shaped not by fear, but by courage, compassion, and the quiet, unwavering persistence of a stranger who refused to leave them behind. Days turned into weeks as the cowboy remained a steady presence, guiding them through the delicate steps of rebuilding a life they had never imagined possible. And though each task was small, a warm meal prepared, a roof secured over their heads, a place to rest without fear, it carried monumental weight in a world that had offered them nothing. And slowly the mother began to feel a glimmer of hope creeping into her heart, fragile yet undeniable, as if the darkness she had carried for so long was beginning to lift, the once impossible idea of safety and belonging now tangible in every thoughtful gesture and quiet action the cowboy took. And it was not just shelter he offered, but a sense of identity, a last name that would no longer leave them invisible to the world, a name that would stand for dignity, recognition, and the possibility of love beyond hardship. And when he gently spoke the name aloud, letting it settle over them like a promise, tears streamed down her face, tears of disbelief, gratitude, and relief all tangled together, as she realized she could finally breathe without the crushing weight of anonymity and rejection. her daughter giggling softly beside her, her laughter a sound she had almost forgotten, a melody that made her chest ache with joy and unspoken pain. And as they unpacked their few belongings into the small, sturdy home he had helped secure, she noticed the subtle ways he anticipated their needs, leaving firewood neatly stacked, water fetched, and a small garden ready for planting. Each detail an unspoken message of care and respect, and the mother began to understand that trust was no longer a risk but a bridge to a life she had never dared to imagine. A life where the world could see her and her daughter not as shadows or burdens, but as people worthy of protection, warmth, and opportunity. And she felt a shift deep inside, the tight coil of fear and caution loosening with each passing day as the cowboy's consistent presence showed her that strength could be gentle and guidance could be kind without demand. And though she still carried the memory of loss and betrayal like invisible scars beneath her skin, those marks no longer dictated the contours of her future, because here, in this home built on steady hands and patient heart, she saw a world that would recognize her worth. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine laughter, play, and dreams without the constant shadow of fear, while her daughter danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and the cowboy watched quietly, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and humility, knowing that the greatest rescue is not merely from danger, but from invisibility and despair. And as evening fell and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, the mother realized that life had offered her a rare gift, a chance to be seen, valued, and protected, a chance to reclaim the dignity stripped from her. And in that moment, she understood that hope, once timid and fleeting, could flourish into permanence when met with steady kindness, unwavering patience, and the courage of a stranger who had chosen to rewrite the story of two lives left behind in darkness into a life finally bathed in light and belonging. With each passing day, the mother felt a quiet transformation within herself, a gentle strength she had never realized existed, as the small routines of life, cooking a warm meal, tending to the garden with her daughter laughing beside her, watching the sun rise over fields that no longer seemed empty, wove a sense of normalcy she had long believed impossible, and the laughter of her child, pure and unburdened, became a melody that filled the walls of their home with warmth and hope, echoing in corners that had known only shadows. And the cowboy, ever present yet unobtrusive, observed silently, the pride in his eyes hidden beneath a calm exterior, knowing that the smallest gestures of care, the consistent protection, and the patient guidance had begun to rewrite the lives of two souls who had thought they were destined for loneliness. And as she discovered courage she had never tapped into, speaking her mind, making decisions without fear, and stepping outside the boundaries imposed by past pain, she realized that life was no longer about survival alone, about simply avoiding danger or despair, but about embracing the possibility of joy, love, and connection, feeling the bond between herself, her daughter, and the man who had quietly become the anchor in their lives, a presence that demanded nothing yet gave everything. And the daughter, freed from the weight of uncertainty, explored the world with the curiosity and playfulness that childhood deserved, her laughter weaving into the fabric of the household, turning walls into a sanctuary and sunlight into a promise, while the cowboy maintained a watchful distance, allowing them space to grow, but ready to intervene whenever needed, understanding that true strength often lay in restraint and quiet support rather than grand gestures. And as seasons shifted, the mother noticed the subtle changes in herself, the way she could face strangers without flinching, the way she could make plans for the future without dread, the way she could imagine a life built on trust rather than fear. And every day brought moments of realization that love, patience, and persistence could overcome even the deepest scars of abandonment, while the cowboy's silent encouragement reminded her that healing is not instantaneous but cultivated through consistency, care, and courage. And in the evenings, when the sky blazed with the colors of sunset and the fields stretched endless beyond their home, she would sit on the porch with her daughter in her lap, feeling the gentle rhythm of breathing and heartbeats, the quiet security of belonging washing over her. And in that stillness, she recognized that life had shifted from mere existence to a tapestry of second chances, where dignity, joy, and family were no longer distant dreams, but lived reality, where the world had finally noticed them, where the past had lost its power to define their present, and where every step forward was met with hope rather than hesitation. And as the cowboy watched from a distance, unseen yet ever present, he felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the lives he had touched had been irrevocably changed, not through force or demand, but through the gentle, steadfast presence of someone who refused to let despair dictate the fate of two souls left behind. And in that moment, the mother understood fully that love, belonging, and the courage to embrace a new life were the true rewards of survival. The life she and her daughter now led was no longer a struggle against emptiness, but a journey toward happiness, trust, and the quiet miracle of being truly seen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, the mother held her daughter close, feeling the steady warmth of a life she had never imagined possible. And for the first time in years, she understood that survival alone was not enough, that hope, trust, and love were the true treasures she had long been denied. The cowboy stood nearby, silent yet present, a guardian whose simple acts of kindness, a name, a home, a hand extended without demand, had rewritten their destiny. And in the quiet of that evening, as the wind whispered through the trees and the world seemed to pause in reverence, she realized that family is not always born of blood, but of courage, compassion, and unwavering presence. And as her daughter's laughter rang freely into the twilight, echoing the joy of a heart finally unburdened, she knew that their story was no longer one of loss and despair, but of second chances, new beginnings, and the extraordinary power of one brave soul who chose to make a difference when the world had almost forgotten them.